Chapter 9. Corran's green eyes narrowed. I don't think the commander cut me any slack, sir. Tycho held a hand up. Forgive me, Mr. Horn. That did not come out the way I wanted. From your Corsac record and the way you tend to excel in scenarios where you act alone, you have struck me as a loner. Loners don't tend to like it when they're made to be a team player. But that's not how I am, is it? Corran frowned. I can work with others, but I know I can only rely on myself when things fall apart. I can't help that attitude because it kept me alive in tough times. Tycho pointed towards the passage deeper into Folor Base, and Corran fell into step with him. The problem with that attitude, Corran, is that it keeps others away. It makes it more difficult for them to help you when you need it. It keeps them uncertain that you will help them when the time comes that they need you. Hey, I'll never leave a buddy in trouble. I don't doubt that. But you define buddies on your terms. Others may not see themselves as your friends. The taller man pressed his lips together in a grim line. It's clear that being here is not easy for you. That's an unwarranted assumption. I've adjusted as well as anyone. Corran glanced to the right at Tycho. Why do you think that, sir? You were with the Corellian security force and spent a good deal of your time hunting down people who are now your allies. That transition isn't something you can make overnight. It couldn't have been any easier for you, sir. You were an Imperial pilot. Tycho did not reply immediately, and Corran sensed a window of vulnerability that had opened, then slammed shut almost immediately. He knew it with a certainty he'd known when he'd hit on lies suspect told him during an interrogation. He wanted to pounce and push, but the hint of pain he saw flash through Tycho's eyes stopped him. Let's just say, Corran, that my situation was quite different from yours. Tycho's face slackened into an emotionless mask. Different time, different circumstances. Corran heard pure honesty in Tycho's words and decided against pushing. That honesty cleared his mind and punched through walls he didn't realize he directed. You may be right, sir. Looking around here, I see the sort of smuggler's hideaway my father and I ached to bust wide open. Just looking at this place, I know it had to have been used by smugglers before the Alliance turned it into a base. If I'd known then what I know now, you would have been even more convinced that the rebellion was wrong. Yeah, I guess I would have. Corran slapped his own belly with his right hand. I remember being in the Corsac Academy when the Imperial warrants for Han Solo and Chewbacca were issued. They were charged with the murder of Grand Moff Tarkin. No word about the Death Star, of course. I remember thinking that if I were already in Corsac, I'd have gotten Solo. I thought he was a blot on Corellia's honor. The hint of a smile tugged at the corners of Tycho's mouth. And you still do. Corran winced. He smuggled spice for a hut. I understand that he made some choices that made his life fall apart. I can sympathize with his freeing Wookiee slaves. No one on Corellia liked the idea of slaves, but he sank pretty low after that. Tycho nodded. When your life disintegrated, you didn't sink that far, so he shouldn't have. Something like that. Corran stopped just before they entered the corridor out of the hangar. Is that your assessment of my opinion, or your assessment of Solo in relationship to your leaving Imperial service as he did? Tycho's smile broadened. Interesting insight. I think there was a time that Solo, who had bound his conception of honor to his service to the Empire, forgot that honor could exist outside Imperial service. This seems to be a misconception that has been corrected. And correcting it won him fame, glory, and Princess Organa. True, but what's important is that he knows honor exists inside you and can only radiate out. What goes on outside can't change it or kill it unless you abandon your honor. Too many folks give it up too easily. They do whatever they can to fill the void in their hearts. Tycho shook his head. Forgive me this little lecture. I've had an unfortunate amount of time to think about this sort of stuff. Two Alliance security officers walked over to where Corran and Tycho stood. The female lieutenant spoke with a calm, even voice. Captain Selchu, are you ready to return to your quarters now? The taller man suddenly looked very fatigued, as if his skeleton had just become one size smaller, so his flesh hung loosely from it. Yes, I believe so. Thank you for this conversation, Mr. Horn. You're welcome, sir. Tycho nodded to the woman. After you. No, sir, she said. After you. Her tone struck Corran as all wrong. He had assumed she had been offering to escort Captain Selchu to his quarters as a courtesy, but the edge in her voice transformed her words into an order. Why would they be forcing him to return to his quarters? I don't understand. She's treating him like a criminal. He started after them, trying to reconcile the security officer's action with a need to protect Tycho from some threat. He couldn't imagine anyone in the Alliance base who would begrudge Tycho actions taken before he joined the rebel cause. Becoming a rebel was like starting over. The data screen was wiped and the past forgotten. And I still have reservations about Han Solo. Even so, I don't want to murder him, so he doesn't need protection. He realized he was attempting to rationalize why Tycho was being escorted by armed guards, and the most simple answer was because Tycho presented a threat to the Alliance in some way. The obvious ludicrousness of that idea shone like a supernova because if Tycho was a threat of any sort, no one would trust him to be teaching pilots how to fly. Then again, he is assigned a headhunter trainer. There you are. Corran's head came up at the sound of the woman's voice. Just a bit taller than he was, but slender and walking on very shapely long legs. She entered the hangar from the corridor and stared right at him. Corran turned and looked behind himself to see who she was addressing, but when he looked back at her, she had stopped right in front of him. I was wondering where you were. Me? Corran raised an eyebrow. Are you sure you were looking for me, Arisi? She nodded confidently. Sympathy played through her big blue eyes. I was sent to find you. The rest of us are in downtime, going over what happened out there. Not enough laughs, so you wanted me to join you? He shook his head. Thanks anyway. Some other time. No, now. Arisi took firm hold of his left elbow. We do want you there, so we can apologize. Corran hesitated, covering his surprise. She sounded sincere, but she was from Thefera, and almost always in Bror Jace's company. He tried to figure out if she was setting him up, but the gentle way her short black hair lay against the nape of her long neck distracted him. I'm not sure I'd be good company. You must come. She tugged him gently towards the corridor. Look, we all used your data because Commander Antilles told us our exercise involved doing just that. It wasn't until we made our runs that he told each of us what had happened, what he had done to you. He ordered us to say nothing to you except to report our scores. None of us felt good about what happened, and we want to make it up to you. He nodded and started walking with her. So how did you get the job of coming after me? You picked the sabacc card with the lowest value? Arisi smiled at him, her eyes dominating a delicately sculpted face with high cheekbones and a strong jawline. I volunteered. Noara Ven and Rosetta Ynur are trying to talk some sense into Bror Jace, and I had to walk away. You'd abandon a fellow Theferan to a conversation with a Twi'lek lawyer? Her laughter echoed faintly through the dim corridor. Strip illumination ran along the edges of the tunnel where the floor met the walls and gave them enough light to travel by, but most of the people in front of them were shadowed silhouettes. Bror Jace is from a family that owns a significant portion of stock in Zaltan. His people are known for being rather haughty and obstreperous. I hadn't noticed. I would have thought you a keener observer than that. She gave his arm a squeeze. Besides, Bror has noticed you. He sees you as his chief rival for supremacy in the Squadron. He's forgetting the commander and Captain Selchu. She shook her head. No, he's not. He's just ignoring them. As Commander Antilles said, those who have served with Rogue Squadron before are legends, and Bror doesn't think it's possible to defeat a legend. Become one, yes, but best one? Never. Irisi, I appreciate your candor, but I'd hardly expect you to be speaking of a friend in such uncomplimentary terms. What gave you the impression we were friends? Perhaps the fact that you spent a lot of time with him? Oh, that? Irisi chuckled politely. Better the moth you know than the Emperor's new envoy. I could never truly be friends with anyone who grew up in the Zoltan corporate culture. My people are with Zupsha, the true leader in Bacta production and refinement. My uncle was the person who discovered the contamination of the Asher and introduced into lot ZX1449F. Really? The woman glanced sidelong at him, her face frozen for a millisecond. Then she smiled and playfully slapped his left shoulder. You. I know Theferan corporate politics is boring, but it's the lifeblood of my people. Though there are thousands of Vratics who actually grow Alazi and refine Bacta, the 10,000 humans who run the corporations are really the people who make Bacta available to the galaxy. Since we're such a small community, and I'll admit, a fairly affluent one, we set great store in the accomplishments of our relatives. Corran nodded as they stepped down to an escalator that took them down deeper into the heart of Folor. Choosing one of you from each corporate family was meant to keep things even. Were that possible, of course. Irisi winked at him. More of us would have been sent, I suspect, but strong involvement with the Alliance is a thing of fierce debate on Thefera. Benign neutrality seems to be the course our leaders are choosing. Playing both ends against the middle means big profits for the Bacta cartel. But you felt strongly enough about the rebellion to volunteer to join in. There are times one must place higher ideals over personal safety. At the bottom of the escalator, they stepped off and walked across a small chamber to a dark opening carved in smooth, melted stone. Beyond it lay a noisy stone gallery with next to no visible light, unless the bright colors of strobing neon tracery were to be considered adequate for lighting. Voices from dozens of alien throats croaked below, or shrieked above the booming din of human conversation. The heavy, moist air stank of sweat, acrid, cloying smoke, and fermented nectars from hundreds of Alliance worlds and not a few Imperial strongholds. Corran paused on the threshold of the makeshift tap cafe the rebels had named DownTime. If I were still in Corsac, I'd be calling for backup before setting foot in the place like this. Irisi, taking his hand in hers, led him into the room. As if she could see things he could not, she guided him between hologame light tables and hollows of pilots and techs. Back in the corner, a holoprojector had been set up. It appeared to be projecting a sporting event being broadcast down on Commonor, but the exoskeleton padding the players wore and the curiously spiked ball they tossed back and forth weren't from any game Corran recognized. Aside from a quartet of Ugnaughts sitting right at the edge of the projection ring and staring up at the towering figures, no one appeared to care about the game. The rest of Rogue Squadron had gathered in a corner of the tap cafe. Corran spotted Gavin first, both because of his size and his nervousness. The youth stared at all the different aliens as if he'd never seen them before. That surprised Corran because he thought, with Mos Eisley being on Tatooine, Gavin would have had his fill of aliens. Then again, I doubt the kid spent much time there. He's as green as the foam on Laminale. Over on the right, Bror Jace and Noara appeared to be deep in conversation. Shael slipped past Corran and handed Gavin a mug full of steaming liquid that smelled sweet. Lou Jane, seeing Corran, smiled at him and rapped the heel of her mug on the table around which they stood. Corran's here. The Bothan's reaction to his arrival appeared to be relatively apathetic, but everyone else seemed to be pleased to see him. The Twi'lek pointed towards Corran with the tip of a head-tail, and Bror Jace managed a tight smile. Stepping forward, the Theferan pilot offered Corran his hand. I want you to know that I would not have flown with your data had I known. I'll be the first to sign the letter of protest to General Sam. Letter of protest? Noara looked a bit exasperated. Some members of the squadron feel that a protest of Commander Antilles' treatment of you is in order. Corran looked Noara in the eyes. You don't think so? The Twi'lek slowly shook his head. I don't think it will be effective, and I believe, quite honestly, that this incident is really fairly minor. Corran smiled. I'm glad to see someone hasn't lost a sense of perspective here. Bror's blue eyes narrowed. What do you mean by that? I mean, my friends, that we're part of a military unit involved in an illegal insurgency against a government that controls the vast majority of planets in this galaxy. We're all volunteers here, and we've all come because we expect to win freedom and liberty for all sapient species by overthrowing the government. We're all willing to make the ultimate sacrifice if it comes to that. Yet we're going to protest how one of the most decorated and revered leaders conducts training exercises? I don't think so. Gavin gave Corran a wide-eyed look of confusion. But what he did to you wasn't right. It was nasty and cold and meant to hurt you. I'll agree it was nasty and cold, but it wasn't meant to hurt me. He looked around at the rest of the squadron. Commander Antilles had a point to make with me, and he made it. And he made one with you. Your being here like this, your discomfort with what happened, and your desire to protest my treatment means I know you're going to be there when I need you to be. And you know I'm willing to do what I need to do to make sure our squadron can do its job. If that means I go in alone or with Oral or whatever to get information, I do it. The only thing we all have to remember is this. There's nothing Commander Antilles can do to us that will be worse than what the Empire has already done on hundreds of worlds. They destroyed Alderaan. They destroyed the Jedi, and they'll destroy us if they can. Because of what he did today, Commander Antilles knows he can count on me, and I hope the rest of you do, too. Irisi raised Corran's left hand above his head. I think Corran's correct. He might not have been the best pilot on the course today, but he's probably the one who learned the most. Lou Jane stood and gave Corran a firm hug. As the second worst pilot today, I say thanks, both for your skill and your wisdom here. Corran blushed slightly, freed his left hand from Irisi's grip, and extricated himself from Lou Jane's hug. Thanks to all of you. But just so you don't think I'm this cool-headed all the time, I have to admit that I had a discussion with Commander Antilles in which he pointed out most of these insights. The wolfman growled in a low voice. Yelling? Punches? No, just some clear and concise conversation. Shael bared his teeth, and Gavin laughed. Lou Jane fished into her flight suit's thigh pocket and produced a handful of oddly shaped credit coins. She held them out to the Twi'lek, who cupped them in both hands and smiled avariciously. He flicked at a couple with taloned fingers, then looked up and froze as if caught bloody-handed. Corran knit his fingers together and let them rest against his belt buckle. And those credits are for? Winning the pool. Noara carefully slipped them into his pocket. I said you'd be reasonable. Rysati elbowed him. You took reasonable because you got the best odds with that wager. The Twi'lek looked offended. I hold opinions. I don't bet them. Corran laughed. Who will challenge Commander Antilles to an X-Wing death duel? Irisi raised her hand. It was an even odds bet, too. Noara won by betting what was in my brain, but you bet by what was in my heart. Corran pointed to the bar. In honor of your insightfulness, I will buy you that which your heart desires. She took his left hand again. And if it doesn't have a price? Then I'll buy you a drink, and we'll talk about how else to make you happy. Bror Jace bowed from the waist in Irisi's direction. To make her happy, you would have to make her family's corporation yet more profitable. And to do that means I'd have to be boosting the use of Bacta, right? Corran opened his hands and took in the whole of the squadron. And since the Empire buys Bacta, and will be shooting at their pilots, I don't think that'll be too hard to do at all. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.